So that was, I would say, really how I got into this, was just sort of trying to figure out what was going on, and then realizing that the biggest conspiracy of all was the universe, that the universe itself was conspiring. And I think what they call synchromysticism, what it's really doing is showing these intricate connections between all these different events, anything from media to news events. And some people criticize, which I think we should address certainly, some people criticize that their connections are random or too loose, that they're connecting things that aren't meant to be connected, which I think is an important thing we need to address. But from what I ended up taking from it was realizing that these connections, in my opinion, were incredibly valid, and that to me it was evidence of something bigger than Illuminati, bigger than anything that I could attribute to any group or Hollywood mind control or things like that. And these are topics that I researched very much and was convinced for a long time this was the explanation. And then I've come to see that those are still valid areas of research. So, certainly these things do exist, and yet I still feel there's something beyond that. It's like an onion. There's layers. Yeah. And I think there is certainly something that goes way beyond human-handed conspiracy.
And this is up for, in one sense, if you ask me, interpretation. As you mentioned, the random connections. Other people say no, that's not the case. But obviously, there's no rules involved in this. I mean, even in a court system or in the law system, everything is up for interpretation. The same thing, to me anyway, applies to this thing. No one can tell anyone else what works or doesn't work when it comes to connecting various seemingly unconnected subjects. This is about finding the bridge and finding the threads that connect the subjects, no matter what anybody else says. That's if you ask me, Alan.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and that's, like as I said at the beginning, why I felt you needed to have different authors in this book was because it comes down to personal interpretation. But there are things which I think are perhaps, I don't know if indisputable is the word, but certainly where there's overlap, where we can find areas of agreement. But what it comes down to is if we're viewing the universe as a sort of living piece of art, well, then of course it's all interpretation.
That's right.
So that's a huge thing right there. But as far as you made the point of say a court case or something like that. When I see a lot of criticism online of what these guys are doing as they're just making random connections. But I could turn around and see people in the, you see guys like Vigilant Citizen or things like that where they're going to say, okay, well, this music video is using this symbol or this company uses this logo, so therefore they're tied into this grander conspiracy of, right. Yeah. You want to say Illuminati or Masonic influences that are using these symbols. But to me, that's incredibly short-sighted because, for one, those connections are just as quote-unquote random or up to interpretation as anything else, because you can't speak for that artist or that logo designer. We might be able to make certain educated guesses in certain areas, of course. But then there's also things that are unintentional. And to me, that's actually where the real magic lies, is in the unintentional. But I guess when you see these people drawing these connections, what I think was a big red flag for me pretty early on when I was sort of I don't want to say leaving the conspiracy mindset, because I still believe there are plenty of genuine conspiracies. But as I sort of looked to that next onion layer, if you will, was seeing guys who were pointing out different triangles, illuminated eyes, and drawing this back to conspiracies. I'm sure you're familiar with Freeman from Freeman TV. I think you've had him on your show.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He makes, he's done a thing about corporate logos. You yourself did a corporate logo video, which I very much enjoyed. I thought that was a really good attempt at being even-handed. Really, really enjoyable programming.
Thanks.
But there is, of course, that it's a very difficult subject to start to broach, because now when you're talking about things like Vesica Pisces, you're talking about things like the pentagram. That's when I feel like you start getting into grayer and grayer areas, because you can't always assume that this is a connection to some other secret society. And like I said, the big red flag for me was, I don't remember whose video it was. It really doesn't matter, but someone talking about the triangle, and the triangle was Illuminati, and the square was Freemasons. Obviously, call themselves square men. So you have this thing of the square means Masons, and the triangle means Illuminati, and the circle means, and what shapes do we have left?
Yeah, well, I know exactly. Like they own the symbols, right?
Right. So if we assume they own the symbols, well, then that's it. End of story. Game over. All right. So everything that you're interacting with is made up of basic geometry, and as is life. When we look at nature, you have things like fractals and phi ratios. Do we assume the Masons control that? I don't think so. If anything, they are incorporating symbols, and we have to be really careful how we, where we give credit, because just like anyone who's ever seen like a Zeitgeist video knows, the Catholic Church, or let's say early Christianity, they're incorporating different religions into their own mythos so that they can, as a control system.
Yeah.
Is probably what their incentive was. But in doing so, they're acknowledging, okay, so we're going to take a little piece of this, a little piece of this. And I see that the Masons basically did the same thing. They saw a geometric shape or something, a poetic image that they thought had a higher meaning, and they said, okay, we revere that, or we are going to acknowledge that shape or that symbol has some sort of higher meaning. That doesn't mean that it's now theirs. So that's to me a really important distinction to make.
Absolutely. I mean, exactly. These symbols and shapes are attracting forces. These are something that artists have known about for centuries before the Masons came around to the scene, or their predecessors. Even in that sense, these are things that they wish that they would be the creators of, but obviously aren't, So,
yeah.
No, I agree with you totally.
And you look at the swastika, even, obviously that swastika predates Nazism, but they incorporated that symbol. They decided to use that symbol, and forevermore, that symbol has become a symbol of evil fascism. But if we let one group define a symbol, we've done a huge injustice to our study, to ourselves, and perhaps even to the symbol itself.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. What would happen exactly? Let's follow through on that thought. What would happen if various regimes around the world adopted different symbols? A circle or a square. Eventually, would ban all of them because of political correctness. Where would we end up then? It doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's why. More so than, and this could be maybe a controversial statement, but I'm more offended if I look at, say, a synchromystic who is drawing what we might consider a loose connection between symbols. People say, that's nonsense what they're doing. But I'm actually much more offended by groups who come out and say, this is what this symbol means. Of course, under the guise of trying to expose something. When I see vigilant citizens saying, okay, well, this lady covering her eye means this. Well, it's not up for you to define it. You can define it for yourself. You might have certain psychological knee-jerk reactions when you see it. You might have an instinctual idea of what that means or what it means to you, but it's a symbol is living artwork. So that, again, is up for interpretation. And I feel like if you're going to get online and define for your group of followers what a symbol means, that's where we get into dogma. That's where we get, you're just building a new dare I say, you're building a new dogmatic ideology around your interpretation of symbols, and I think that's incredibly dangerous.
I know, I totally agree with that. It's sometimes it's called being, in the truth lingo, if you will, waking up in one sense. But obviously, if you are stuck in one paradigm, it's just jumping from one box over into another box. You haven't really set yourself free in that sense. And I think the interesting thing for me, anyway, when it comes to synchronicity, synchromysticism, it gives you a broader perspective, a wider view in that sense. It also opens up in terms of actually giving you examples that hopefully one can apply to one's own life. I mean, for me, it's about interacting with, as you said before, the conspiring universe, that there's messages everywhere. There's things communicating with you, but we have to become aware of it. For us to communicate with it, we have to first know that there is an attempt there to communicate with us, right? And we are creating that meaning when we're doing it. And when I look through your book, the one you've edited or compiled, if you will, material from various authors here, what happens is that you get a good sense of, getting an example of some of these connections that are out there. And I think if you apply it in the right way, you hopefully can begin to see that in, if you will, in your own life, that things around you are speaking to you all the way. That's how I would, kind of define it, if you will, if we kind of backtrack a little bit and try to get to the core of what it is. Let's say we have, Alan, somebody with us who doesn't know about what synchromysticism is or ever heard the term even. How would you define it if you can?
Sure. So there's different interpretations. There's synchronicity, of course, has been defined as meaningful coincidences. There's a very common example is you haven't seen a friend in 10 years and you're thinking about that person. You wake up one day and you're just like, I wonder what John's up to. I haven't heard from him in 10 years. And then you get a phone call from him and he says, hey, I was thinking about you. I just wanted to know how you were doing. And it's like, so is that, did you predict the future? Did you know he was going to call? Did you have some sort of telepathic link that you sort of made him call you? Or is this just a total coincidence, yet it has meaning? And of course, the meaning is the subjective part because it has meaning to you.
Yeah.
And of course, so this is, again, we get into some little gray areas, but this is a common example because it's something everyone can relate to. Most of us have had experiences like that or something along those lines. You're thinking of a song and then that's the next song that plays on the radio or whatever it is. And these could be tiny little portents into the future, or they could be signs from an intelligent universe, or both, or neither. Again,
it's interpretation, yeah.
Yeah, but these are common examples, and I think what the guys who would call themselves synchromystics, what they're doing is they're trying to explore all these different connections and almost create a bigger picture out of it. And to me, so I don't want to speak for anybody else, but for me, this has become something along the lines of, you're mapping out a fractal nature here. You're showing perhaps evidence of quantum entanglement. All these things I think are what I would sort of take from it is you're showing how things are connected in amazing ways. And I guess before I go too far ahead, I should, like you said, if someone's not familiar with what they're doing, what a lot of them might do is take, say, they might be examining a movie, and they're going to look for mythological archetypes within the movie, and they're going to see how the movie they decided to watch tonight, which could have been filmed in 1972, they're deciding that they're just sort of looking at it. And then it just so happens that later that day or the next day, there's a news story, major headline, which directly relates to the movie they watched. Now, how many people might have watched that particular 1972 movie the night before? So it might only have a sort of resonance to that person. But what we start to discover is this happens more and more and more and more. And
do you think that happens because when we begin to observe it? Therefore, it's a response, if you will. If we become aware of the communication, does the communication increase, or is it just that we become aware that it's actually there